Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest in the webcast series 2020 from ADGM. My name is Steve Barnett, and I'm the Head of Business Development for Abu Dhabi Global Market. This is the latest in our webcast series and is being simultaneously broadcast again on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. Today, I'll be conducting a fireside chat with Sarah Malik, CEO and International Disputes Counsel with SOL International here in ADGM. We're going to do brief introductions, and that'll be followed by that chat, which will be set up as a question and answer session. And we'll be picking up questions also through our live channels, which we'll come to as we come towards the end of this session. So please feel free to submit your questions via LinkedIn, via Twitter, via YouTube, and we'll come to those as we go. For any of those questions that we don't get to on the way through, then we'll pick those up subsequently bilaterally with you. As in previous webinars, we'll be looking at a range of different topics, and this is to really build on the webinars that we've had previously. We've had sessions on employment, we've had sessions on in-country value, on the post-COVID business environment, on corporate debt restructuring, on helping businesses to be more resilient through exporting and expanding their business opportunities. Never let a good crisis go to waste, as we always say. When Sarah and I started talking about how we were going to run this session, our intention was to focus particularly on private family offices and family businesses. And the more we discussed this topic, the more we realized that the things that we wanted to say and wanted to talk about actually had very broad applicability. So while we will reference specifically some issues relating to family offices and family businesses, we felt that it would be better to extend this to a broader platform, broader audience. And I really see the sub-theme of this session being about the new normal. To set the scene, we've seen a host of initiatives that have been put in place to support businesses, and we're going to talk about those. We're going to talk about grounding some of this in reality as well, what we're seeing people do to take their businesses forward in the post-COVID environment. We're going to touch a little bit on how we use technology and how we see people making use of not just platforms like this, but other ways of using technology to interact, and wrap up with some of the risks that we see people looking to mitigate as part of this overall challenging environment. And let me say once more that we appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days in order to participate in this session. I want to just put this in the context of some of the things that we've done within ADGM to support people through this crisis. And as you'll have seen, we've taken steps to support the people that are operating in our community and those people that would like to join our community and be part of this environment. We've put in place some measures for new organizations, including those that want to continue their businesses from other jurisdictions into ADGM, which is becoming particularly relevant with the rise of the importance of economic substance and the desire of people to be managing businesses closer to home in order to do that. We've given a 100% waiver on the fees for doing that. For the incorporation of new LLPs and new companies, we've given a 50% waiver on that. For existing businesses, we've given a 100% waiver on the renewal of commercial licenses, the business activity fees and data protection fees. And for financial institutions, we've cut in half the supervision fees and completely waived all annual fees relating to funds. We've also looked to support those people that are trying to innovate through these difficult times and have made reductions, permanent reductions in the fees associated with startups. So with no further ado, I'd like to invite Sarah to introduce herself and to introduce SOL before we get into our discussion today. Sarah.
Thank you very much, Steve. So as Steve has introduced, my name is Sarah Malik. I'm the CEO and founder of a dispute resolution practice called SOL International Ltd, set up at the heart of the ADGM. And we specialize, amongst other matters, in private family work, dispute resolution and employment work. I'm delighted to partner up with the ADGM today to hopefully provide you all with an interactive and useful session where we're going to talk about the practical realities in a kind of legal landscape of what's happening with businesses, how we can assist businesses, and what happens going forward. As Steve has indicated, we're open to answering questions, and we hope you do have some that are of use and you can take away. And we want to set the scene by setting out all the various initiatives that the government has laid out, as well as the resolutions that affect all of us, both in the workplace and out. So I'm going to hand back to Steve, and I think we'll kick off the discussions from there. So Steve.
Thanks, Sarah. As you said, we've seen a lot of efforts that have been put in place to help people through these difficult times. I guess going back to the middle of March, when we saw the first cabinet resolutions coming in place, giving rise to the initial stimulus package, and then building on that. I'm sure people are reasonably familiar with these, but do you want to give us a brief overview of the sort of things that we've seen that have been put in place?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. So basically, as I'm sure many of you are aware, what the UAE has done quite properly and in time, I say, but proactively, is to provide stimulus packages to assist businesses to keep going. So it's not only to assist existing businesses, but also to give credibility in the market to those who may want to enter the market in times of crisis, because as Steve has already indicated, there's always an opportunity as well. And what the cabinet resolution does is to effect that by offering incentives and packages to business owners, businesses and commercial enterprises to make these times slightly easier to navigate. And those have ranged from, for example, subsidies in whether it's bills for citizens, electricity, water, through to ensuring commercial activities, the registration fees for certain of those activities have been suspended or have been completely replaced for the time being by incentives such as free packages for 12 months. As Steve has already alluded to, the ADGM themselves have not asked for commercial licenses when they were new to be paid. Various of the other free zones, DFC has initiatives of the same nature. Banks have been given the ability to lend at very low rates. Startups have been exempted from performance guarantees. Real estate registration fees have been reduced or suspended for commercial activities. Vehicle road tariffs have been suspended, and municipality and tourism fees for tourist and entertainment sectors have been suspended. There's been rebate on rentals for restaurants, tourism and entertainment sectors. So the point of the government stimulation packages is to assist businesses and to give some kind of promise in terms of going forward that there are measures available to ensure that not everybody needs to feel a panic at this stage, and there are packages available that people can take advantage of in these times.
Thank you. And I guess it's not just about stimulus packages as well. If we look to the workplace, we've seen initiatives taken to protect both expat and national workers.
Correct, that's right. And the packages for the, should I say the stimuluses for the expats and the national workers have been really quite revolutionary in terms of, we have the labour law, and we've had to deal with, well, what happens in a situation like this? As we know, in the UAE, visa and place of work are usually tied hand in hand. You work from the place of your sponsor, wherever you're sponsored from. But given the situation we're in, things had to be done and done fairly quickly. So one of the initiatives that was undertaken, and this was under Ministerial Resolution 279, which was for expat workers, there was, if you like, a waterfall provision of how workers could be assisted, and employers could be assisted during these circumstances or during this period, to ensure there is continuity and to ensure there's not a break. And one of the first measures was to allow the remote working, because otherwise we're all we have to work where our place of business is. My place of business is the ADGM. That's my license. I live in Dubai. What was I going to do? Was I traveling into ADGM every day, or was I able to work, from my home place? And that's one of the first measures in terms of the waterfall, that you allow this remote work system to ensure business continues. And following on from that, employers were enabled and are enabled to ask employees to take their accrued annual leave, to take a period of paid leave to assist the business needs, because it is all about retention and attempting to keep as much normality as possible. But where measures need to be taken, they do need to be taken. So allowing that paid leave to be undertaken, and that can be done without consent. Employees can be told that we want you to take your paid leave. Thereafter, asking that has to be with consent for the unpaid leave, any period of unpaid leave, and it affects different employees in different ways. So certain employees may have a provision where they're able to take a period of a few weeks or a month's unpaid leave. Others may not. It's to open the dialogue, but it's provided in that resolution 279, and thereafter, as it becomes a bit more serious, it can be a temporary reduction of wages, and that's happened across the board, in my experience, a lot. But again, it's with consent, so the employer writes to the employee, or they have dialogue, and they're able to say, we can agree this for this period of time until the resolution is in place, or until a fixed period of time, with the intent that all the end of service benefits, for example, are still ring-fenced. And then there is an option to have a permanent reduction of wages, and that would have to be lodged with the ministry. There's a slightly different package in 282, which applies to Emirati employees, and it's about preserving the continuity. But businesses have been assisted, as have employees, to navigate to ensure that the last measure that's taken is to reduce headcount. And with that, it's not just the employment side of things. There's been resolutions that have kicked in terms of, well, how do we actually deal with the reality of working from home? What issues and what factors kick in? The remote working, the cybersecurity, data, confidentiality, privacy, ensuring employees have correct setups at home. These are all ways that business has been able to continue. In fact, Steve, I think what it's shown many businesses, and certainly what I'm reading, seeing and hearing, is people are saying, well, this could be a new way of doing things, blended, working this way is not a bad thing, even as we go back into normality, if that's what you want to call it, whatever the normal may be.
And I said at the start of this that I think this is about a new normal. The way that we've worked previously is not the way we're going to work going forward. And just to pick up on the point that you raised at the start of that, in terms of people being required to take holiday, and one of the things that's been very important for the health of the workforce is that people do still get a break. If you're not careful, we see the working day becoming 24/7 permanently. So I think these are very good measures that actually not just protect the organisations, but protect the workforce as well. We're starting to see things open up now, slightly different paces in different emirates, with slightly different concerns. But just run us through some of the things that we're seeing from your perspective.
Of course. So as you say, the different emirates are opening up in different ways, and there's no comparison in terms of one opens early and one opens slower. It's a measured approach that works for the particular emirate because of the workforce, etc., whatever measures are taken. But what we're all in the same boat, if you like, where everybody's on the same page, is there's a gradual return to normality, whatever that normality may be. So the we're everything's kind of panic, nobody knows what's going on, there's uncertainty. I think we're over the worst. I think I can say that fairly. And what's happening with the opening up is I've seen some very, very sensible approaches to the opening up. So where businesses are opening up, employers are very aware of those employees, and they are protected again under the resolutions. If you're age 55 and above, if you have, chronic respiratory diseases, if you're uncomfortable about coming in, if you're pregnant, if you've got the care of young children, you're not required to have to be in the workplace. And in terms of opening up, whether it's in the workplace or even opening up in terms of malls or restaurants or generally, we're seeing that there's general compliance. There's a huge health and safety initiative in terms of, it's taken very, very seriously. And just opening up hotels, for example, and many of the family businesses are hotel owners and, have a vested interest. I'm staying in a particular hotel at the moment, and I had a hearing earlier from here. And I was speaking to some of the staff, and they've told me how the policies in the hotels are, for example, there'll be one room opened and the next one will be closed. When I leave this room, it will be disinfected, sanitized. Nobody can stay here for the next 4 days, and then the next can come in. So it's been taken really seriously, which is good to see. And at the same time, I don't think, from what I'm seeing, there's pressures that are unduly being placed, whether it's on the businesses or the individuals, because I think if everybody's working together, they're realizing actually it works. Steve, I think a very important point you made earlier was, in terms of what's happened to our working days. I mean, I don't know Sunday to Monday to Tuesday anymore. It's just this day, that day, and any day, because that's what's happening. So it's hugely important, both for yourself as an employee or if you're managing employees, to ensure that, there is that space, there is that break, because it all becomes very easy to kind of roll into one being at home. And from my side, what kind of makes me laugh sometimes is there were many employers and many kind of institutions, traditional institutions, who never bought into the whole remote working or this could actually ever work. And I'm glad to say, and I've seen some leaders in families and other organizations who are saying, this wasn't such a bad idea. We're seeing this productivity, we're seeing it's working, and we see that there is a way forward in this. So I'm glad that to some degree that's been brought to the forefront.
Absolutely, and I agree with everything you said. From our point of view, the first people that we saw coming to us and saying, we don't want a physical meeting, we want to do this by a video call or even just a phone call, were typically the principals of family offices, and they were the demographic which I would have thought would move last in terms of that. The people that really would have liked you in their office, having a coffee and having a good face-to-face discussion. So it's great to see how quickly people have adapted. Thank you for the sort of background on all of this and the instruments that have been put in place to protect businesses and the workforce. The only one of them I take any issue with is that I now need to carry my Emirates ID, otherwise I can't buy a pint of milk. The first time in my life I've ever been age checked. Carrying forward from the sort of the regulatory and legislative background that's been put in place to support people, let's make it practical for people. What are we actually seeing organizations doing? What's the reality on the ground of the way that we see businesses responding and changing as a result of the COVID challenges?
Well, Steve, from my perspective, and I deal with the whole nature of businesses, from kind of private family businesses as individual ultra high net worths and corporates. One thing everybody's doing is looking at their business models, and they're looking at them seriously. They're looking proactively to identify what can be done better and how. I'm seeing businesses who are looking at redomicile. I'm seeing businesses who are looking at their assets and thinking, where can we capitalize? Where can we have outside investment? Maybe families traditionally who've never had outside investment, but now they're looking at that, not sometimes even because they need it, but because they're buying into the idea that this is a way forward. I'm seeing businesses look at corporate governance a lot more seriously now, as in traditionally there may well have been a reluctance, and family businesses in particular may well have been ran by senior family members. The addition of externals now and the impetus they can bring in and the change, I think, is really being appreciated. More than anything, I'm seeing a real appetite and culture for businesses to streamline and to look at, maybe it's because it's the only time we're getting now, because everybody is remote, everybody is looking at things in more detail, but reorganization, restructure, policies and procedures procedures. We're checking in on, are our people looked after properly? What are our communication policies? How are we ensuring we are keeping connected with our workforce, our people generally? What practical policies, procedures do we have in play? What do we need to prioritize? Businesses are really looking at, okay, what are my assets? What are my liabilities? Where can I negotiate a deal? Where can I, defer a payment, whether it's a loan, whether it's a rental, whether it's an asset? What am I doing with my asset database? Is the time to hold on to it now? Is it going to be depreciation? Can I realize it elsewhere? So I'm seeing lots and lots of changes generally in businesses now where we're being approached to just give proactive advice. I think another feature that's quite prominent now with businesses is they're looking way ahead. And even family businesses especially are not just keeping an eye on what's happening now, they're keeping an eye on the future because it's important. And they're keeping an eye on what happens next with the next generations. Are they ready to come up? Do they need some more grounding? What will be 10 years and 15 years? There is a lot more long-term planning, and part of that long-term planning then they're looking, for example, and I have been asked within the last week, I think twice, just generally, and I'm about to do an advice as well for an international client on re-domiciling and coming to places like the ADGM or the DIFC or places that, international free zones. That's becoming much more attractive and interested, as I see, for businesses who are even centered outside of the UAE. So it's interesting to see that the connection, the productivity, the commitment, the corporate governance, these are all features, the policies that all businesses, whether family or otherwise, are really focusing on now. That's what I'm seeing on the ground.
I think it's a really good point. One of the things that we've been seeing, and I'm sure it echoes what you've just said, is that change is inevitable at this time. It's not optional, it is inevitable. And so the people that are going to do well through this environment are those people that embrace that change, look at being really proactive around it, and the people that fail are going to be those people that have change forced upon them. And we've seen a huge interest in everything from the simple SPV structuring vehicles, the establishment of holding companies, the conversion of family offices into more corporate type structures, the adoption of asset protection vehicles, whether that's through trusts or foundations, or other things. I mean, there really has been a very reassuring, actually, proactive stance that we've seen in the marketplace. Are you seeing people really embrace? We talked a little bit about the workplace activities to keep morale high within the businesses. I know it's a difficult time, and maybe you can share with us a few examples of what you're seeing out there.
So to me now, soft skills, interpersonal skills are hugely important, as well as the whole tech skills. And I speak, I think, as somebody who is of a generation who maybe tech wasn't my first thing. And I probably, my kids know more about tech than I do. But now I'm glad to say, I know all about WebEx and Zoom and this platform we're using now, and there's many. So I think firstly, in order to remain connected, there's not just a phone call. Many businesses internationally are ensuring they have their own platforms for connectivity to take place, and secure platforms. Number two, it's about leadership. Everybody's looking up to the organizations and the heads of, because obviously it filters down. And the leadership morale, in my view, needs to remain high. And it's happening in those businesses that are surviving and thriving. There's regular calls, there's regular check-ins, people feel isolated sometimes when they are at home, especially if it's new to them. And what businesses are doing, and they're doing it well, as I'm seeing, is they're having these regular kind of, meetings with their employees or with their people. Everybody feels connected, but they don't feel like they're being, spied on, if you like. So the connectivity is really important. I've always been a strong believer in if you're going to employ somebody, you've got to trust them. You don't need to monitor them 24 hours a day. And I think there's a buy-in to that. And it's interesting because I was listening to a podcast the other day from a senior lawyer here from a senior family as well, who was saying, I've completely changed my mindset. I used to be of the view everybody needs to be in the office. I need to see 20 hours of work being done, but it can be done at home. But in terms of the leadership, I think to be able to show that you are connected, you are concerned, that issues can be raised to you, you are going to take them seriously. And as you are rightly identified, Steve, at the outset, different employees, different people are affected differently during these times. So you might have, somebody who's absolutely A-OK and, they're itching to get back in the workplace, for example, because they don't want to be home and they're by themselves and they've had enough. And you might have people who are really struggling and juggling in terms of the childcare commitments and the homeschooling and two, spouses working, or maybe there's just one spouse full stop or one individual. So leaders and businesses cannot assume the kind of one box fits all. It's important to engage individually with your employees, and this is a feedback I've had certainly is we've really got to know our people and we've really got to know strengths. So you've had people employees and employers coming back saying that we've connected a lot, we finally understand so and so has actually got a different skill set which we can utilize in another aspect of the business. So it's certainly opened up, in my view, leadership qualities to show or to help individuals see that the organizations care about them as individuals and how they are able to work and get on with their day-to-day. It's important.
It is important, and we're covering quite a lot of ground here. I'd just like to remind the participants on various different platforms that you can start to submit questions now, and we'll pick them up throughout the course of this. We will come specifically to your questions a little later on, but please don't feel constrained in terms of asking them now. I will get them, and I can perhaps feed them into the things that I'm asking Sarah as we go through as well. So you talked about technology in terms of connecting people and making sure that people are properly looked after, and I absolutely agree with you. One of the things that we do now within our team is a call once a day. It may only be a half an hour call, and it's partly about keeping people connected with what's going on in the business. But frankly, it's also about who's having problems with the homeschooling. Has anybody seen what's happening in the streets? And it's just a way of socially keeping everybody connected. Despite all of that, I think there is a good side and there is a challenging side of what we're seeing in terms of technology. So you touched on cybersecurity earlier and a couple of other themes. Perhaps you can give us a little bit of your insight in terms of what we're seeing by way of development of policies and procedures, data protection, cybersecurity, some of those challenging aspects of this environment.
So, Steve, the free zones have, for example, data protection policies. Onshore, we don't necessarily have that, right? So what's happening now with the remote working, it's obviously very important that data is stored properly, that there is confidentiality, privacy is maintained, especially if you're working on matters of, private confidential files, etc. So employers now have a duty to ensure that those employees who are working from home stations, because you're more susceptible to attacks when you're not on a company kind of, intranet based in an office, but those measures need to be put in place. There's been a huge surge of activity in terms of downloading, purchasing, whether it's security softwares, changing platforms to make sure that runs. So what's really become quite prominent in my view is the confidentiality, the privacy and the data protection. We're all working from remote stations, therefore what's on our screens is more visible to others, and that becomes more visible where you might have 5 young people living in flat sharing or in particular accommodation. They might be competitors, whether it's in the banking world, in the legal world, or otherwise. They're friends, but now they're all working from home. So what happens next to ensure that level of confidentiality, if you're working on a transaction or otherwise, is maintained? So these are real life examples. Now, I read some stories in the UK where one of the HR asked that one of the individuals in a circumstance like this left and got new premises because they weren't comfortable with having opposition, even though they're friends, living in the same place while there's remote working. What's happening here, in my view, is we're now having more of an impetus for employers, almost because we don't have the legislation on shore, but it's kind of almost making its way through the back door, because there is an obligation, and it's in one of the annexes to one of the resolutions, that this kind of a confidentiality needs to be taken seriously and there needs to be measures in place. So I think employers need to ensure that the machines employees are working on, whether their IT people check in and you can do the team view, that they're secure, that there are ways of kind of having backup of information, because with companies, a lot of their assets sometimes are these digital assets or the IP on the systems, and if that's lost, that's a huge problem. That might not be such a big deal if you're sat in an office and you've got backup servers and you've got internet when everybody's dotted around. And some people are working and not even based in the UAE because we've had, stimulus packages, or we've had resolutions, should I say, where people can go home and have, unpaid leave and then come back into the UAE. So they're still, maybe at home with laptops. I'm not saying they're necessarily working if they're on unpaid leave, but nonetheless, the materials are, susceptible to attack unless there's proper provisions in place. So I'm seeing employers are taking that a lot more seriously. We're getting asked about what is the best way to implement, how can we train our employees, and we're running webinars, for example, on basics, sometimes just confidentiality, security. People don't have shredders at home all the time. I'm sure there's been a huge increase in shredders being purchased just to make sure that confidential documents are shredded. So these are kind of policies or procedures, I think, that are needed in the tech space to make sure there is protection for all.
I think that's a great perspective, particularly when we think about a tech environment and the importance of things like cybersecurity, and forget those traditional physical security things like if you're disposing of waste at a home rather than in the office, let's shred it first. I've got some questions coming in from the various different platforms. And some of these you may feel comfortable with from a more legal perspective. Some I think are just getting our experience as business practitioners. So let's see how they play. Mita via LinkedIn is asking the question: how businesses can trim costs without layoffs, and what are some of the relief packages an SME can access in order to relieve those costs, reduce those costs? Maybe I know you've got a particular niche around the family businesses. I think SMEs is a really interesting point as well. It's sort of sitting between that large corporate and some of the family businesses as well. What have you seen in the marketplace with people doing?
So in terms of the businesses trimming costs without layoffs, it's a similar kind of advice we give to even individuals who have been laid off, because the mantra is the same. Anybody who's in a time like this, the first thing you need to do is sit down, look at your outgoings, look at your income, and look at your priorities. And where you don't need to spend, cut back on that spend, whatever that may be. And it may be silly little things that you don't even take on board, whether it's from excessive stationery supplies that don't need to be there, whether it's from subscriptions that are not needed. Where you can cut back, you'd be surprised at how much you can cut back, and just look at what's essential. And it's better to cut that back than cut back employees. And this, I think, is why Mita's asking the question of how do we prevent the employees? Where else can we cut back in our spend? So whether it's through your finance department or if you're an individual, whether you sit down and look at, okay, what am I spending each month? What am I spending on my rent? What am I spending on my supplies? What am I spending with my externals? What of that do I not need to spend? What is essential that I have to spend in order to survive or in order to continue business? And what of that is just optional or it's nice? What businesses are doing, as I'm seeing, is prioritizing and then putting on hold and doing deals. I said in a previous seminar I did as well that unless you ask, you don't know. So one of the ways is it might not be advertised that, someone might give you a rebate or give you a holiday period or give you some time to make a payment. You might have staged payments, but unless you pick the phone up and ask, you're not going to know. And you'd be surprised at how many people are willing to help in these circumstances. So if you're a business owner and you ring up and there is no stimulus package or otherwise to assist in a particular area, but if you ring your supplier or external and you say, look, I just need a couple of months or 3 months, or I need to make this payment over a staggered period, you'd be surprised it's not always a no. Sometimes people are reluctant to ask, but in my world, unless you ask, you don't get, right? And what's the worst? They can say no and you're in the same position. In terms of relief packages, SMEs can access. Again, I think it differs whether, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. When I say jurisdiction, I mean ADGM, DIFC, onshore. SMEs are able to go to, I know, for example, with the ADGM, and there's been fantastic packages across the board. I'm a small business myself, right? And the not having to pay the commercial license going forward for 1 year has been really quite helpful. And, there's been reduced rents. Wherever the SME is registered and based, I would start from there to say, okay, where can I go to? Who's my free zone, am I onshore, what are they offering? A simple Google search will often show you what is on offer, whether, some landlords, even private landlords, are offering rent holidays and rebates. They don't have to do that, but they're doing it. You might not know, you might fall within that. You can ask for example, relief packages in terms of, if there's loans with banks, you can go to the bank and see if there's a rebate that can be given to you. Every single expenditure you have, it's worth, in my view, trying to reduce, extend that expenditure. And if your provider is being given any kind of stimulus, they are likely to be able to assist you. I see here a knock-on effect. So for example, if a landlord is assisted, the landlord is likely to assist the tenant. And that's how it works. When they say we're all in this together, that's exactly how it is. So that's my kind of view on in terms of SMEs. SMEs to me are important to survive, and they really do make up a huge not only number but also a very important part of our business structure here in the UAE. Everybody wants them to survive. This is a place for entrepreneurs. This is a place where things can happen. I know certainly with the DED, there's been instant licenses that are now being granted. And I think the cost of the instant license is a few hundred dirhams. Yes, there's some costs thereafter in terms of setup, but it's an encouragement for individuals or SMEs to have a separate branch or to be able to access a trade license and then keep going. So there's an impetus for entrepreneurs to come to the market, bring ideas, and there's lots of great ideas that can be bought. So if you take anything away from this, it's just ring, ask, look around, educate yourself, go onto Google. Google is great. Just looking at, what's out there. You just need to put in SME package. Where do I go? Well, what do I do? Go to your free zone, go onshore, go to the bank, go to your landlord. You'd be surprised at what's out there.
And go to your customers as well, I think is another important one, because I've seen a number of the very large corporations here in Abu Dhabi who are desperately keen to support their supply chain through all of this as well. They understand that the importance of delivering their business, whether it's the largest companies in the Emirates down to the mid-size and small companies, they understand the importance of their supply chain being intact through this process. And a number of them are really going the extra mile to support as well. So I've got a couple of other questions that are coming through that I'm going to combine. Hassan via LinkedIn has asked what our thoughts are on the age criteria restrictions, so children below 12 and those over 60, as that affects major lines of business and changes in the population structure. And I guess given your themes around family businesses, when we're thinking about things like malls and retail, this is particularly important. And combined with that, Ali via Twitter is asking what our outlook is for the retail sector businesses. So maybe we can address those two things together.
Okay. Yeah. Well, firstly, in terms of our thoughts on the age criteria kind of restrictions, look, I genuinely believe they've been put in for very good reason. I think it's because the authorities or the powers that be have decided that there's a demography of people who are probably more susceptible than others, and therefore in order to contain spread risk, etc., they've decided that under 12s, over 60s can't access certain malls, or can't access malls, or can't go to restaurants, etc., because it's more of a risk. Now, in terms of practically, yes, it can be. If I'm a mother of two children who are both under 12 and I can't really entertain them anymore, they're at home, I take them outside. But I don't think in terms of business and population structure, it should have that much of an effect. Yes, it has an effect in terms of you've got young children in a mall, maybe they want to buy a lot of things and that's not happening. But if children are still able, or the population over 60, I've seen a huge increase in online, whether it's online shopping, or you've seen a lot of the retail, and now I'm talking about luxury retail. Steve, one of the points you made earlier was about adapting to change. For the first time, the luxury retail we can now buy online, for example. Now that's a business that wants to survive and thrive through this change. So somebody, for example, who is over 60 can't access the mall and can't go into that shop, they can buy that online now. So I think there are ways of countering that. So yes, you're not going to have the walkthrough of the person who may come into the mall and buy that, but businesses who want to thrive and maybe hadn't needed to be online before are now re-looking at their branding, re-looking at themselves in terms of, well, I can't just rely on my name. I do need to get with the program. I do need to be online. I do need to be accessible to others. So for that reason, I don't think that the whole kind of, the under 12 or over 60 should hopefully have, a huge impact on the business generally. And in terms of the retail sector, I think it wouldn't be correct to say that it won't have any impact. There's clearly going to be an impact, but everything I'm reading, everybody's saying there's about a 10%, maybe up to about 20%. There will be layoffs, no doubt. But having said that, that's again, I think it's a contained measure. We're not at a stage where we won't get there. Hopefully, where people are panicking, thinking all the shops are going to close down and retail's dead in the water and people are never going to shop again and go into, the malls. I think people are going back in, people are being sensible. We can't expect to pick up and be back where we were in December 2019 overnight. It's just not going to happen. So the retail sector businesses are back in play, and they may well have, unfortunately, like many businesses, they may well have some casualties, but that's not to say that retail business is just dead, full stop. I think it's more, I'm going to use the term blended. There's a blended reality to retail business now that many of the retailers have taken on board, that it's not just the shop. We need to have the online presence. We need to be accessible to all, and that's survival. A lot of what's happening with businesses I see generally as well, one of the themes that runs out, is businesses are looking to survive and to continue. And in order to survive, changes need to be made. I don't think this is spelling out the end of the retail sector at all by any means.
No, it's very from our perspective. One of the things is everybody else. If not, then I'll carry on. The place of our environment that's held up most is the low-cost innovation licenses that we have, and the partnership that we have with Hub 71 for the delivery of support around innovative businesses. We've seen everything from people really rapidly responding to the need to go digital for their business, particularly retail. We've seen people adopting AI techniques for the improvement of customer experience and trying to tailor solutions better to individual customers. We've also seen the growth of the logistics sector as well, and I think we'll continue to see the growth of the logistics sector in support of that digitalization of business. And so, what we're trying to do is to say to people, if you are ready to innovate, to find new solutions to this business, then we're here to help. And our partners through Hub 71, through the Abu Dhabi Investment Office and some of the things they're incentivizing, and other structures are there to help. So it's an old and well-tried expression, but I think innovate or die is very true in this environment. Easy to say. As somebody that's approaching one of those age points, I do find it quite interesting, and a number of my friends have passed the 60 point, and I think it's also one of the things that we're seeing is actually a growth in some community spirit. I've seen a lot of people that are reaching out to the older of us in the community and saying, look, do you need shopping done? Do you need help with various different things? Do you need support? And while I'm not saying that 60 is old, it's coming to that point now where hopefully we're returning to some traditional values of community and broader looking after those that are more vulnerable in our environment. And if we do that, then I think that's a change for good.
Absolutely, I agree.
So we've talked about a range of different things. We've got about 10 minutes left in this webinar, and I'd welcome other questions. Those were great questions that people have put through, and so welcome any others that come through the various different channels. We said at the start of this we'd talk a little bit about some of the risks, and we've touched on those. We've talked about how you can mitigate risks through negotiating with contracting parties. Perhaps taking that to a little bit of a more legal aspect. What about things like non-payment issues under contracts? Are you seeing a lot of defaults coming through yet? Are you seeing a lot of litigation coming through?
I think the reality is there will be litigation. I don't think it's necessarily starting now. What I've seen, there's a cycle, there always is, in terms whenever there is whether it's a global crisis or a crisis in a particular industry. When there's non-payment of contracts, obviously the first point is to try and negotiate with each other to try and see what terms can be varied, amended, what measures can be put into place, how the contract can still work for both parties. But sometimes if you can't get the extension or you can't get the settlement, then the only route is legal. Even then, there's been an increasing, and I think there will be, and I'm seeing that generally across social media, there's been a general consensus that mediation may well be more important for businesses to try and reach a settlement rather than go straight to the courts and start litigating. And I know, including the ADGM, there's some mediation centers, there's a real impetus. So there's people there's a mindset that's buying into mediation as well now from the legal world, because before mediation wasn't taken as seriously as it perhaps is now, because mediation allows the business relationship to continue. Whereas by the time you sometimes get into the courtroom or litigation, it's kind of over, right? You're not going to maybe continue relations with a business that you've sued or that has sued you. The mediation allows the businesses to still come out maintaining a relationship and having found a solution. So what I'm seeing now is there's been letters of demands, there's been a default, there has been some, and I've been involved in a couple of mediations where solutions have been arrived at between businesses who really just want to get the business done, see the situations we're in. I think I'm not going to put the legal to the side, but what I say, even as a lawyer, I say putting on an employment lawyer's hat, I say putting on a commercial lawyer's hat. Sometimes it's not just about the black and white letter of the law, Steve. My view is you need to look for a solution. What's your end goal? When you're business to business and business A is not paying business B. Now, if business A is not paying business B because they genuinely, have had a cash crisis, they are suffering, they need to openly communicate that with business B. And business B equally needs to not just say, but your clause 4 says this, and therefore I'm going to hold you to that, and we're going to court. They need to understand we're in a new reality. And I say the same to employees and employers when I talk about employment relationships and what should be happening vis-a-vis what is happening and what's the ground reality. So what I'm seeing is communication becomes so much more important, a resolution mindset. If we look at a problem of what we want to achieve rather than what the problem is, you're more likely to get to the goal. I have no doubt that in due time you're going to have a litigation that will naturally ensue. That happens, and there's no two ways around that. But I think businesses generally are not are wanting to either try and navigate through with each other to try and extend terms, settle terms, or it goes legal. And I think we all have a duty at that point, whether we're business owners or whether we're lawyers. I mean, certainly in my mind stream, if somebody comes to me and says, I'm not being paid and I want to sue, I will always ask, are you sure that's what you want to do? Let's look at this or this, or have you thought about maybe trying to sort this out without the courts? Have you thought about having a round table, like this, or have you thought about another way? Do you want to maintain the relationship with this party? Are they genuinely suffering? And it gets people thinking. So to answer the question, I think legally we will have a whole host of disputes. I have no doubts, because that's just natural after any kind of change. But at this time, in order to survive and in order to keep going, I think the mindset of businesses in terms of mediating their disagreements, coming to resolutions is far more time and money well spent at this stage.
Yeah, and I'm so pleased that the ADGM courts have supported the growth of mediation as well. It's always good to hear a litigator saying, use me as the last resort rather than the first resort. And I think that's great advice. We've got another question in from Matthew on LinkedIn, and it's quite specific, but I think it's a very important one nonetheless. Are there any rebates or initiatives, incentives perhaps, to support freelancers or around the freelancer license? So quite specific. I haven't seen any. Have you?
I know the ADGM recently, actually, because I was looking at it for interns and things. We've introduced, when I say we, because I'm ADGM, I call myself we. We've introduced the temporary, I think it's called, there's a temporary permit we can get, whether we're using a freelancer, a contractor, a student, an intern. And I know that creative freelance. So in terms of the ADGM, we are able to use people who are not on an ADGM license. We have to get the relevant permit from the ADGM, and they're not expensive, but it's opened up the ability to use others, which is great. We also have the virtual labour.
They're free at the moment. They're so inexpensive, they're free during the COVID point.
Free.
They're free at the temporary licenses, yeah.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are grants or loans that can be availed for freelancers and SMEs from the government that range between 15 to 50,000 in grants. That there has been something specific that was reported recently. So if you are a freelancer, and again, it's about the spirit of encouraging that kind of entrepreneurship and encouraging, the positivity of people to keep going. I think it's really interesting that what's happened and how we've reacted as well to the situation is the traditional model of, we had to be, and we still do have to be sponsored to work here, and we have to be under an entity, but the restrictions are opening up a bit. Certainly with, the ADG has been quite innovative in what they're allowing businesses to bring in, i.e. the individuals, the freelancers, the consultants, as long as you've got the NOC, or as long as the relevant permit is in place. With freelancers, for sure, I've read that there's grants and SMEs as well that the UAE government is giving, and I think it's up to 50,000 if I'm not mistaken. So you should definitely again look that up, and if you fall within the criteria to avail yourself of it.
So, Matthew, we believe that there are grants that are available there. So it's worth doing a little bit more digging and have a look on the I guess the DED website would be the place to go for that, Sarah.
DED, yes, and it's usually the DED website will have information. You could even just do a general kind of check. Even in the press, I'm sure the National have reported. That's where I read it. I kind of, sometimes getting my legal knowledge from the newspapers, who are very up to date with what's going on. So it's quite good to kind of read up on what's going on. And there's I'll come back with the exact website. I'll either put it on the feed, or there is a website that's dealing with the freelancers and the SMEs.
Thank you. You talked earlier on this website. This webcast about the things that you've seen your clients doing, which have really made a difference, which are really positive. So the proactive things that you see people putting in place. One of the things I'm interested in, because we can always learn lessons from the good and the less good, is where you're seeing the blind spots being, particularly with families, because at these sorts of times, you said you didn't expect to see the adoption of remote working as quickly as we did, and nor did I. And I think it's a great move. Nonetheless, I'm sure there are a few black spots which are still there. What are you seeing?
I think it's just about reevaluating relationships and family businesses who are reluctant to kind of, look at the new norm and think this is just the way it is. This is just the way things are going to be. They're going to get left behind. Some of the blind spots in bringing on too much change too quickly is also not good. Family businesses and our businesses need to be aware that when there is change, the gradual process and the bite size is better than trying to, get from 0 to 100 in 10 seconds, get to 10, 20, 30, 40 and go gradually. So I think structured change with trusted advisors is important. I think otherwise, if there's a wholesale change in terms of the way one's doing business, or in terms of what's being understood, you then are more likely to fall foul because it's not tested. You don't know the cultural reaction. There's a culture for every business. When I say culture, I mean what the business buy-in is, how your people are, how what your business ethos and values are. When you're being tested, whether it's by the remote working, whether it's by change, if there's too much change all at once, then culturally that might not fit within the business, or people might not have been trained. So never underestimate that when you are bringing change to the table, to be able to effect that by communicating communication and from, by leadership. So sometimes we might have all these great changes, policies, procedures, initiatives, but really nobody knows how to work amongst them or around them. And they feel it can make people feel more insecure that we've actually changed from this model to this model, but I don't really understand this new model, and how does it affect me, and how does it impact me, and is my job going to be taken over by a robot because of all this tech that's going on? So I think that kind of keeping on top and not losing sight of where there is change, there needs to be communication, there needs to be, you need to kind of see how it affects individuals, the training side of things. We mustn't lose sight of that. It sometimes becomes very easy to forget the interpersonal side of things. And you might say, get on a weekly call and say, right, guys, we've all got this new great innovative tech, and you might have somebody who really doesn't know their way around it, or we've got this new these new policies, or we're going to invest in this side of a different aspect of business from what we've traditionally done. Well, maybe some of your people have no knowledge or background in that. How can you help them to get from that A to B? That's those are the kind of blind spots, I think, the softer skills that we are more susceptible to lose out on unless we have a structured plan to do this. So absolutely we have to do something. Absolutely there has to be proactivity. But I think where we're going to see failing is where it's done too quickly, without a thought out plan, without proper communication, without it being filtered across vertically and downwards through organizations. That's really key. And I don't think you can underestimate the kind of, if you're not educating your own people, then what are they doing to serve your business needs?
Well, I think the other side of it is going back to Mita's question from before about how you can reduce costs. For those that are able, I think the other side of that equation is also extremely important, which is this is a great time to invest. Assets, high quality assets, are often underpriced at times of crisis, and I think it's always important for people to get out of that blind spot of saying that cost is the be-all and end-all of things when business is slow, and also to think forward in terms of where the investment opportunities are. It's one of the things that I know we've seen a lot of people taking advantage of, and hopefully we'll see a little more of that as well.
It's been across the board, and we've seen it in the global crisis before in 2008. Where there is, problem, there's often opportunity as well. And many people make a lot of money if you happen to have, liquidity. Certainly you're able to, as businesses, also, call in deals and maybe get them cheaper because you're able to pay up in a cash sum. So there are, even today, lots of opportunities people are looking at, whether it, certain industries that may be affected, or it might be real estate, and that people are looking at and saying, well, there's going to be an appreciation, it's not going to stay like this forever. So there are, as you've indicated, there are always opportunities, and investors are, and certainly savvy investors are continuously looking at those always, and that's here and internationally. I think that's across the board.
Absolutely, and we've had a point made on Twitter as well that when it comes to succession planning as well, families can be reluctant to really put in place innovative structures around succession planning, and they leave it till the very last moment. I think when we get a crisis event, we see many of the same features that we see in a succession event. So we see families in dispute, we see the things that are under pressure, and so planning for succession now is a good opportunity, because it takes account of the challenging times that we see now, and also that future proofing and future planning. Sarah, I think we'll probably bring it to a close there, unless you've got any closing remarks that you'd like to make.
No, I just wanted to say thank you very much for this. I hope it's been useful for everybody. And if there are any questions, I think, Steve, you're going to say as well, that emanate after this, we're happy to take them. Steve will tell you how to put those through. But just, stay safe, stay positive, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you to my guest today, Sarah Malik, for what's been a very broad church of different perspectives here. Thank you for your questions on LinkedIn and Twitter in particular. Those that you've got that you still place on those feeds, we will get them subsequently. And for those of you that are watching this on catch up, please feel free also to put your questions on there. We'll come back to you relating to those. We have a number of future webcasts coming up with more important themes, particularly one coming up that's going to be focusing on cash and liquidity, which will be extremely important at times of stress when cash is undoubtedly king. So thank you to you all for taking time out of your busy day. Thank you again, Sarah, for your participation, and we'll call it to close. Thank you.
Thanks. Just one before we go. I said I'd come back to you with the website, which it's the Ministry of Culture and Knowledge Development have launched a program to support the freelancers and SMEs. So I hope that assists the lady who asked the question.
Thank you very much. And I have one final question that's come through, and I think it might be from your children. Mummy, where are you? On
my way home soon. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah. Good night all.
Bye. Bye.